Thank you, everybody. This is the March meeting of the Public Safety Committee meeting. Now time is 12:02. Sorry for the delay. We're having a little technical difficulties. However, this was with some developments from municipal legal that's been trailing, if you will. Some research is being done and some resolution issues. I'd asked Ms. Ennis from the law department a couple of months back if we were at a time where we could get an update on the memo of understanding, the TNCs from specifically with Uber. So with the direction of the chair, Mr. Trainee, of course, here, we are merging the two. Today's the meeting is jointly the Public Safety Committee as well as the Ad Hoc Committee on Transportation Network Companies. So I'm Paul Honeman. I'm the chair of the Public Safety Committee. And Mr. Evans, you just introduce for the record.
I'm Bill Evans, and I'm the chair of the Ad Hoc Committee on TNCs.
Okay, and we'll just go through the dais up here. Identify yourself, please, for the record. We will be on record, of course. And I wanted you to know, for the members in the audience, we do have a section towards the tail end of the agenda for audience participation, and that does not preclude members from the industry. If there are questions specific to your knowledge factor or your information that we might need from you, you may be called up to give testimony or ask questions of you. So for those that are in attendance, anybody here representing taxi cab owners or permit owners? Okay. Anybody here representing Uber or transportation network companies? Okay. All the persons, I'm assuming, are just either interested, maybe connected somehow or another. You'd be more than glad to give you the time towards the end of the agenda to have some participation and comments. So we'll just start, I guess, over here. If you would just identify who you are for the record, sir.
Myron Fanning, Deputy Chief, Anchorage Police.
Paul Holman, Assembly.
Jim Steele, Assembly.
Bill Evans, Assembly.
Elvie Gray Jackson, member of the Public Safety Committee.
Dick Trainee, Assembly.
Pete Peterson, Assembly.
Dee Ennis, Deputy Municipal Attorney.
Dean Gates, Assistant Municipal Attorney.
Eric Musser, the Transportation Inspector.
Okay. Thank you for being here, everybody. Just another note that member Ernie Hall of the Public Safety Committee will be available by telephone, I think, sometime in the next 15 to 20 minutes or so. All right. We have both the fire chief here, and I know Chief Fullenwider, we had tried to get a message to you that we really don't have a topic per se on the agenda for you, but is there any information you'd like to share before for public safety related that might be needed for us to know?
Just one thing, we had our first real brush fire about 15 minutes ago, and it's under control, right behind Service High School.
Any questions from any members? Mr. Trainee.
Chief, how are we doing on overtime for the fire department?
We're in budget, Mr. Chair.
You're in budget, so we're not over budget for your department at all?
Not yet.
Overtime or anything?
Or anything, yes.
Thank you, Chief. That's what I wanted to know. Appreciate that.
Anybody else? Chief Fullenwider, is because of the lack of snow or the, I guess, poor winter conditions we might have had and probably pretty much enjoyed, does that make us more vulnerable to brush fires or wildfires?
Yes, this is a real early season, and it could have a significant impact.
Okay, so do you know, are you going to be doing like PSAs or getting information out to the public so we can?
Yes, we are, and yes, we have. We have a 19-minute video that's going to be distributed to the community councils and other interested parties through a grant from State Farm. We're also developing a single PSA to go out to the commercial station. We're going to really ramp up this year because of it's such it's really an early season for us.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it. I would probably suggest, I don't know what your budget looks like for advertising and media, but perhaps working through the mayor's office and let us know if you need I'm thinking bus signs. I'm thinking getting out every medium we possibly can to get people's mind around brush fires, and sometimes people like to burn their trash in the spring, clean up and all that. And I'm sincerely concerned about risk with the wildfires. Thanks, Chief. Chief Mew is unavailable. Deputy Chief Fanning is here from the Police Department. We have you on the agenda for both the violent crimes update, task force results update, and if you could just share just a little about the Girdwood meeting. I know you had some information, and Chair Evans was also at that meeting, so if you wouldn't mind, sir, thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start with the violent task force. As you know, in January we had 4 homicides, and we had a rash of gun incidents, shots fired incidents. I think we had 33 in January that alarmed us because in November and December we had 0 homicides. So it alarmed us. That was out of the ordinary. The previous January we had 2 homicides. This January we had 4. So we just started evaluating that, coming up with possible solutions for it. We decided to form a task force, and the task force consists, basically the internal task force is my vice unit, my cap unit, and my special assignment unit. I have 2 sergeants overseeing that, and a lieutenant and a captain, and they report directly to me. We also incorporated state and federal agencies that assist us on a case-by-case basis. Up to this point, and I'm sorry I don't have updated stats. I get updated stats from the task force commander every Thursday, and I don't have the updated ones, so some of this stuff I put out at Monday's press conference. It's higher than this. I know they've worked several different cases already, and they've made more cases. I'm sorry for that. I should have better stats than this, but as of last Friday, we had made 26 arrests. We had seized 5 vehicles. We had 40 guns seized. We had $35,500 in cash seized, and we had seized significant quantities of meth, heroin, marijuana, and other drugs. So the task force has been very successful. We have taken some very violent people, in my opinion, off the street and hold them accountable for their actions. I know we have, primarily based on the homicide unit's professionalism and their work ethic, we've been able to solve 7 cases. We've had 8 homicide cases this year. 7 of them are solved and closed. In conjunction with the task force, or in conjunction with the homicide unit, after implementation of the task force, they were able to close 2 of those homicides within a week. So the homicide unit has done magnificent work, so has the task force, and so has my crime scene team. We continue to work cases. We have seen a drop-off in violent crime, shots fired, even though we still had 2 homicides, and it's unacceptable. We had 2 homicides in February, 2 homicides in March so far. We are reducing it. One of those homicides, or 2 of them, didn't involve guns. The one that we had earlier this week, Sunday, involved 2 roommates, and it was a stabbing. And of course, we had the earlier one with a baseball bat. So we are making progress. I think we had 20 gun-related incidents in February. We had 18 in December. Like I said, we had 33 in January. So we are making progress. We are reducing it. I'm very pleased with the results of my department's performance. So that's an update on where we're at with that. Like I said, we continue to work them. We do have 1 homicide that's open. That's the double homicide. We continue to work.
Hang on just a sec. Any questions or comments for the chief? Okay.
Okay. On the Girdwood issue, I went down with Municipal Attorney Dennis Wheeler, Municipal Manager George Vacalis. We went down Monday night because, as you know, the troopers are pulling out 1 January of Girdwood proper. I also met with Colonel Cockrell down there. I got a view of his police substation there. So right now, as far as staffing that the troopers have in Girdwood proper, they have 3 state troopers on duty there, plus a sergeant and a fish and wildlife officer there in Girdwood proper. They have 2 highway patrol that patrols the safety corridor. So as of January 1, they'll pull out all of their troopers out of Girdwood proper. The colonel told me he would up that 2 highway patrol to 3. So they'll have 3 troopers. I'm not sure the amount of mileage they're going to cover on that highway. I don't know that, but he's going to have 3 troopers there. Of course, they work 410s as well, so he's not going to have 24/7 coverage on the highway. So we have to develop a plan basically to take over some of that stretch of highway. And also we have plans, we're developing plans on if Girdwood votes themselves into the police service district, what that's going to look like. How many officers do we feel that we need to staff them with? I have also, and I'll try to get this to the assembly, I have the state trooper statistics for calls for service over the last 5 years in Girdwood. So we're evaluating all that. We gave them their options, some of the cost projections that it would cost. So I think it's basically up to Girdwood now to decide how they want to go. There was commentary about possibly, if we have a runoff in the mayoral election, possibly trying to get this on a special election ballot, but I don't, that's not my expertise. I don't know how that will work. I just know kind of the funding issues and how much it's going to cost us if we go into Girdwood proper.
Mr. Steele, Mr. Evans, and Mr. Train.
Yeah, I presume the substation that they have is leased.
It is.
And are they going to maintain the lease for the one person or couple of people they have?
That's a very good question. I talked to the colonel about that. They are leasing it for about $6,000 a month is what they're paying, and that includes utilities. He said, if we move into Girdwood, he would like to work out a deal with the Anchorage Police Department on sharing the cost for that, because he would like for his 3 highway patrol officers to be able to go and have a place to work out of. If we are not going to take over Girdwood, or we choose not to lease that facility, he said then he would base them out of Anchorage. So it'll be a difficult task for him as well.
Just as a follow-on, it seems to me continuity for the community to know where the police substation is a valid reason for trying to cooperate on that.
I agree.
Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just so the body knows that at least following our GBOS meeting in Girdwood, the plan, such that it is now, is to probably have an addenda item or a laid on the table item on Tuesday night that will at least create a placeholder for the mayoral runoff, presuming there's one in May. It's kind of a tight time frame, but there's no more elections after that election this year. So the next election would be April of next year. There is a possibility you could do a mail ballot election, but that has expenses and problems with it, and we haven't really done that before. It doesn't give the people of Girdwood a lot of time, but we advised them down there, and there was a pretty good turnout at their meeting, what the facts were. It's possible they won't have a decision in time for by our next, I think, April 14th meeting is when we'd have to pull the trigger. But at least we'll have something in place in case they are ready to do so. That's the status of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Co-Chair. Mr. Training.
Chief, did you say that you told Girdwood what this would cost them?
We gave them some very rough cost estimates, sir. We really don't know the full extent, and it also depends on what type of staffing level we're going to provide for them. We gave them very rough cost estimates.
Could you send that to Assembly just so we have the Assembly members update on what GBOS has?
I will.
And what would be the implications as far as the people down there if they don't elect to have city police down there?
That was a question that was brought up. They asked me what type of calls we would respond to if they choose not to have police, and I told them the run-of-the-mill calls, they're not going to get a police response pretty much. Obviously a life or death situation we are going to respond to. They'll get, if it's a hostage barricade type situation, they'll get my full complement of SWAT and hostage negotiators, but the citizens of Anchorage are going to be footing that. So at some point in time, there's going to have to be a resolution, but we're not going to let a situation spin out of control that might cost somebody their lives. The normal burglary thefts, I think they would have to probably call those cases in, and we take those over the phone.
Chief, you said earlier that Fish and Wildlife officers can be pulled out of there too?
I asked that again today. I met with Major Casanovas and Major Levesque this morning, and I brought that up specifically, and they didn't answer that. They didn't know. They thought he basically worked out of Whittier, but spends time in Girdwood as well. And I noticed on their stats they did have several fish and game violations out of the Girdwood area. So he may be a dual guy, and they may leave him in Whittier.
Okay, thank you, Chief.
Sure.
And I have a question, and I'm not sure if you can answer it, but maybe you have thought it. If you haven't, I would suggest you. Ms. Ennis, I'm not sure if in the past, I remember when APD service area went to the hillside, and there were multiple votes before, I think during the Meisman administration, the vote was citywide. All residents of the municipality had to vote to determine whether or not the hillside would be paying police service area. So I'm not sure, do you have the answer? Would Girdwood be the only?
I know the answer. And I think this was discussed Monday night. I wasn't there. Mr. Evans, I think it was that if just Girdwood does it, then they just need to vote. If it's going to be absorbed into the Anchorage area, then both need to vote.
Okay, so that's still to be decided which direction to go?
Exactly, that big
So
discussion still.
this ballot that may take place in the runoff could be a citywide ballot?
Yes. And that's the problem, the concern with the mail-in ballot.
Okay, very good. And Chief, I just wanted to follow up on something Mr. Trainee asked the fire chief, and that's your budget. With the spike in violence, and it's kind of goes like with the snowfall, our public works, street maintenance, snow removal was very low, but even though we budgeted for a normal snowfall. I know you can't budget for homicides or violent crime calls and such, but what's your budget looking like? I mean, you have to call out crime scene team.
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Chair. We're above where we want to be. We're a tick under where we were last year at this time, but we're still above where we want to be, and we're trying to get that. Obviously, we'll work hard on reducing that. That is the problem, is a lot of these things were not foreseeable, and we have to call out detectives. We have to call out our crime scene team. We have to call out other officers at times to work overtime to backfill some of those people on those specialty teams that we're deploying. So we're above where we need to be. Hopefully, as we get a handle on some of this and as the violent crime starts dropping, then we can get it where we want it.
Any comments or questions from members of the body? Okay. And then I understand you got an academy graduating here next week?
Yes, we do. Next week. I've got the numbers here. We're excited about that, obviously, because we need some help. So I've got that. I think it's 23. I want to say there's 23. I think that's what's graduating next week. We have. It's 20. Yeah, I'm doing this off the top of my head because we have an academy right now that's still in FTO. 10 of them have been released. Seven of them are about to be released. So we're excited. Actually, 11. One was released this morning. So 11 have been released. I think 6 more about to be released within the next 2 weeks. So we're excited about that. And we have 23 that'll graduate next week, ready to go into field training.
Keep us posted as early as possible if there's any budget issues that we need to address. I mean,
yes, sir.
We don't want to get to the end of the year and realize it in crisis mode.
Right, and also we're preparing for a May Academy. I think we have 28 now that have been through the background, have passed the background. So we have 28 in the window. I think they still have to go through the polygraph and a physical. But other than that, it looks like we're hopeful to get all 28 of them. But it looks very good to get at least 26 or 27 out of those.
Thank you, Chief. Yep. Anything else that we need to know about?
No, sir. I gave you a copy here of, this is very rough projections, and I can send it to you, hopefully an email too.
Yeah, if you could send it to the clerk's office, we can all get it. That'd be great.
Okay.
Okay, so I've been tasked to continue on chairing Mr. Evans' concurrence here. Next topic on the item here, we're switching to the Ad Hoc Committee on Transportation Network Companies and the update. Actually, it kind of dovetails with the request I had made of Ms. Ennis in the Law Department. Ms. Ennis, could you please update us on where we were with the MOU that was in place apparently there was some court filings and such. If you just give us a presentation, I guess you'd have,
Okay.
give us an update.
And Dean Gates is going to begin, and then I'll be taking over.
Make sure.
Thank you. Thank you for having us on your agenda today. By ordinance last November, the Assembly directed the Department of Law to review and approve MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, for a TNC pilot program for submission to the Assembly, with the negotiations for the terms generally with Uber's representatives. And by the way, if you have any trouble understanding me, please interrupt, ask me to repeat myself. That'll be fine.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. One of the paramount concerns is public safety. The objective was not to have public safety be a barrier to Uber operating in Anchorage, but to have the MOU ensure that Uber can provide passenger transportation within Anchorage safely. Generally, that means there should be specific means to assure the TNC vehicles, transportation network companies, TNC, their vehicles and drivers are safe for providing transportation for hire in Anchorage. Now, for drivers, what we have for comparison is Title 11, and they're the means to ensure drivers do not pose a danger to Anchorage citizens and visitors is by screening drivers, by monitoring them, and having an enforcement mechanisms. Leather for hire transportation in Anchorage, taxis, limousines, and vehicles for hire, they require a chauffeur's license that enables the municipality to do these functions. We have reached an impasse in our negotiations with Uber on some specific areas where the law department does not want to make policy decisions that reduce chauffeur licensing requirements or comparable requirements for just transportation network companies. Each issue we will discuss next relates to these aspects of authorizing a TNC driver to operate in Anchorage. We have handouts that we provided to you, and one is the table of contents, and we have a chart that shows what other jurisdictions have done, and that's in terms of legislative enactments. And that's for your information. But we're going to talk mostly about the issues and information table. And for the members of the public, we provided some copies that are available on the desk over there by the clerk where Jamie's waving. Now, the issues information table, we pretty much first looked at, well, what are the licensing of drivers requirements? And we listed here four columns, the subject, the municipality's position, the Uber's position, and we provided Uber and the representatives an opportunity to respond and make sure we represented their position accurately. They're here today. They have comments at the end. We have then notes that are just basically information we thought pertinent. So here on the first row, licensing of drivers, the municipality believes drivers should obtain a chauffeur's license. It would be very simple to get a license, have the TNC check they have a license, and then allow them to operate within Anchorage. In the notes column here, we have the basic components of a chauffeur's licensing requirements. Those are a background check, a drug test, a physical, and the license fee. There is also an examination, and we didn't have a big issue with that part. The main ones here are those listed, the drug testing and background check. So the next row is on drug testing. There is a drug testing requirement before a person obtains a chauffeur's license, and when there's an accident or an incident, and there's a for cause, reasonable cause to require a drug test. The municipality wants to have these requirements for TNC drivers as well. Uber and their policies, they have no drug testing in place. They have a different method of doing so. They have, They have no drug testing before they authorize someone to drive on Uber's platform. They have, instead of drug testing after an accident, they have an incident response team. And we've described that here as they have represented it to us. They follow it quickly by contacting everyone involved, the driver, passengers, any public officials responding to an incident, and so forth. Now, the municipality believes that drug testing following an accident by someone who provides transportation services is very important to ensure that whether they were under the influence or not. That's one thing that's a public safety concern. Before getting a license after an accident or incident, that the Department of Law felt we should get assembly guidance on for making some judgment call on whether we want to negotiate around the drug testing requirement or not. That's something the Department of Law does not want to budge on without further guidance. All these things I've listed here in the presentation today that we indicate are issues of impasse are generally addressed in AO 2014-127S, which directed us to work on an MOU. We have, in addition to issues and information tables, some supplementary materials, and we have provided the Assembly some tabs. Behind tab 1 is an article about drug testing, why it's important, and a proposal in California that would require Ubers to have their drivers submit to drug testing. And we won't go into the supplemental materials unless you would like to, but we've provided that for your review. So besides drug testing, another issue that has us at an impasse is the background check. As most of you are aware, before someone is authorized to drive a taxi cab or limousine or vehicle for hire in Anchorage, they must have a background check, a fingerprint background check in Anchorage. The fingerprint background check is submitted to the FBI. Now, there's a difference between a fingerprint background check and the type of background check that Uber provides, and Uber has touted that their background check is very thorough. I'm sure it is in terms of what they can gather when they have a name and perhaps a social security number. The big difference here is with fingerprinting, nobody can provide a false identification when you're fingerprinted. So, for example, in one of the articles under tab 2, talks about a situation in California where a brother perhaps could use his brother's identity, his name, social security number to obtain chauffeur licensing and thereby subvert a background check that doesn't check fingerprints if a brother has no criminal history and he does. So these are the kinds of screening processes that are very important to ensure the drivers don't have a criminal history.
I wanted to slow us down a little bit. With respect to some of the supplementary materials, some of them are somewhat anecdotal, newspaper articles, problems other jurisdictions are facing. Others of them are input that we've selected from professionals. So, for instance, under number 2, which is the background check, the first thing is from our municipal prosecutor and explains that the fingerprinting issue goes to identity and the name-based searches are only as reliable as the accuracy of the name provided and searched. Aliases and former names are captured in crime databases, but certainly not all. We have seen dual entries in APSIN, which is our... Oh, I'm sorry. We have seen dual entries in APSIN, which is a database unique to Alaska, because a person got divorced and went back to a maiden name, and the maiden name and married name have never been linked in APSIN, and certainly not illegal name changes. The only true way to confirm an identity for a database search is through fingerprinting. So the supplementary materials try to give other people's opinions. The next one is from a state trooper in charge with fingerprinting, and he says much the same, that you're not going to catch, if you search for John L. Smith, you'll not get hits for someone who was adjudicated John Smith, and it lays out a number of these. So it shows that probably the consensus from a professional viewpoint is that fingerprinting is safer. Why the Department of Law, as Dean stated, wants to come back here is because, as all these emails have indicated, this is a community decision, and you're the community representatives, and the Department of Law really can't move forward on this MOU until we have guidance on these issues.
Well, with that said, I might take just a pause, like you say, to slow it down a little bit. We've already gone over one to go into the third finding, if you will, or bullet point, fourth. And I've heard clearly that the law department is looking for policymakers to give policy a direction. I'm interested in hearing, though, if, from the perspective of your research, do you have a position? I understand about the licensing, you were saying there's, that's a policy decision, whether we have, requires a chauffeur's license or whether we allow just a regular Alaska driver's license to be the only vehicle, if you will, the only standard that we need. Does the Department of Law have a recommendation on that? I mean, are you just punting it back to us, saying it's your policy call?
Well, to a certain degree, punting, but certainly the professionals have weighed in that fingerprint identification is safer.
Okay, I guess going back one at a time, the licensing of drivers, so the driver's license on the first bullet point. It's saying here, the difference, that you got the notes and the differing, what's required of the persons in the taxi under Title 11, I believe, and what is Uber's position, saying it would be an impediment. Is there a position that the Department of Law recommends, or is it just these are the things we can't come to an agreement on under the MOU?
I think these are policy decisions for the most part.
Okay. How about the drug testing?
Okay. Again, a policy decision. That's uniquely a community because you have the pre-testing and the post-accident testing. That might be one area the Department of Law could rightfully weigh in, that if you have a car accident and drivers are not tested, it could affect liability issues later on for the Uber driver as well. So it might be a way to protect.
Okay.
So I guess my thinking is that some of this, you may want to look at, require some of this and maybe not all of it, but most of it's uniquely community. I would also point out that Mr. Evans actually had requested that we look at bring information about the other locales. And if you look at this chart, at the far right is the drug testing. And only a handful of the jurisdictions we looked at actually required cab drivers to have the drug tests, and all of those jurisdictions required then the TNCs to have that. And by the way, just for the record, we're relying on a couple studies. We've occasionally have gone back underneath to verify them, but more often we're relying on a couple studies that have provided this information.
Okay.
So you can also look in the charts what other jurisdictions have done with the same.
Okay.
And Paul, can I ask one clarification,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman? Is that when we say licensing of drivers, what licensing really is these component parts. So the drug testing, the physical, the fingerprints, and we say licensing, well, but it's all the component parts. And as you see, they are expensive. They're $265, but if you look on this chart, many other locales have required one or more of these.
Mr. Trainee, Mr. Evans.
So, Dee, in other areas that have accepted Uber into, are they still going to require the fingerprint, or has Uber relented on that, saying they're not going to participate in that?
Yes, if you look under the chart, under background checks, and you'll see yeses with an F. F is for fingerprint. So there are a number of locales that have required the fingerprinting.
And Uber operates there.
And Uber operates there.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you, Dee.
Hey, Mr. Evans.
Yes, Ms. Ennis, I think you indicated that on the drug test part, while some jurisdictions don't even require drug testing for taxis, they all required it for TNCs?
If they required it for the cab, then they required it for the TNCs. It appears from what the evidence we're seeing.
Gotcha.
Okay. I just, like, as you say, in the interest of, it's a lot of information to cover here, I just was taking it in smaller chunks. Any questions so far on the topics have been covered? Any questions? Mr. Evans.
Yeah, with respect to chauffeur's license, I know that I read the Portland summary where you got all this stuff, and it didn't deal directly with that necessarily, but are there other jurisdictions that have require TNCs to do chauffeur's licenses, to do the testing and all the other requirements that we do with our chauffeur's license?
And again, I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Gates. We broke it down to component parts because you may favor some of these and not think the rest of them are necessarily, not necessarily a whole all or nothing package.
Yes, through the chair, some other jurisdictions do require the drivers for TNCs to obtain a chauffeur's license from that jurisdiction. Orlando, Florida does so. Houston, Texas does so. Houston, Texas has also a requirement that they obtain a fingerprint-based background check, the drug testing prior to licensing. and a physical examination similar to ours. I wanted to also add that on some of these items, the Assembly addressed in 2013 when we did a major rewrite of Title 11. We included fingerprint-based background checks. It was a main concern at the time that public safety screening be increased for our drivers. So,
Mr. Evans.
were there other questions?
Is it, in looking at I don't think all of the Assembly has had the benefit of seeing the Portland summary. Portland basically went out and asked a number of other jurisdictions what they do with TNCs under a number of different categories. And looking through that, would it be fair to say that it runs the gamut? It looks like in every single category, there are cities that require, some require drug testing, some don't, some limit the number of TNCs, some don't. Some require specific fingerprint background checks, some don't. So I didn't see necessarily a pattern. It just seems like we can pick and choose which cities we wish to follow, but there is no broad consensus on any of these topics. Is that a fair statement?
Mr. Evans, that's a very accurate statement. The jurisdictions that have adopted some type of regulatory scheme, most have been adopted within the past year or the past 6 months, and some on the gamut of not even having a TNC license at all, and just licensing the drivers and the vehicles that use a TNC application. And some have just adopted what type of scheme that Uber would like to see. So you see a variety out there in jurisdictions. In Anchorage, and from the Department of Law perspective, we're coming from a position where we have Title 11 in place and want something that's workable, similar, maybe different, similar, workable. That's our springboard that we're coming off.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Gates, if you would want to go ahead and continue from there, I believe we were at the background check and physical exams. So if you want to probably take the next 2 or 3 in case we have questions.
Ms. Annis, you were going to talk about the next one.
On the background checks, too, I did want to note that in the supplementary materials, we have Uber has a summary from their website, and they go back generally 7 years for courthouse records, and that's because of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Again, I think other records can go back further than that. They do the National Sex Offender Registry and Social Security Trace, which is lifetime. So they do use a sophisticated series of databases, and that's in here. And one of the articles here is Uber says it will toughen background checks, that they realize there's some problems. There's been a couple attacks, assaults. One of these talks about developing biometric and voice certification. California prosecutors sue Uber for misleading customers that they are as safe as cabs, I believe was the issue there. So again, just other jurisdictions faced with some of these same issues. The next actually was a miscellaneous category, which is curbside hailing and kids. I think everybody has agreed that Uber would not be doing the curbside hailing. One of the issues there, though, was a Denver undercover, which is in the first article under number 3, that when one of the news teams went undercover, Uber drivers were more than willing to pick up people from the curbside, and the concern there is that most of the safety of the Uber program is in its app, and people following the rules of that application. So that was very disconcerting. I don't know how much of a problem we have with that here, but so that was very, very disconcerting. And the next one article is simply on people using Uber for kids, which I did at Christmas time for a 14-year-old. To give it a shot, that Uber apparently has their own policy of kids under 18 shouldn't take Uber rides unescorted by an adult, but that more and more parents around the country are embracing Uber to move kids around because it's convenient, easy to track. They have a sense of, because there's a GPS tracking, that there's a sense of safety. That, to me, makes the questions of public safety for the Uber presence here more demanding. And again, the 14-year-old I let use the Uber app over Christmas. He was unescorted. I would assume that the Uber driver had no idea that that person or that child shouldn't be in the Uber app, nor did I. How do we educate Uber drivers? But again, it gives a little bit more seriousness to this issue about fingerprinting and background checks when Uber drivers can pick up either from the curbside or children if they're not following the rules. The next category was the CDL physical exam. Cabbies and nor TNCs are generally required to have a CDL license. That's for bigger vehicles and that type of thing. But cabbies at least have to have the physical exam. And if you look in the section number 4, you'll see what the paperwork looks like on that exam, what they have to go through, and they have to do it every 2 years. So it's a fairly extensive exam versus motor vehicles, which is 100% self-reporting, that do you have a problem or not, and it renews 5 years generally. And I checked, and even physicians do not have mandatory reporting requirements here. I just always assumed they did, and they don't. So there's an issue there, a community policy decision. Do we want our Uber drivers to have physical exams for major illnesses? The next one is insurance. Insurance has just been difficult to pin down, only because I think Uber is their insurance is evolving. They're trying to meet certain concerns. Private insurance is trying to meet certain concerns. If you skip over to tab number 6, you'll see Uber's response on insurance, but it's a nice way to identify what the issues are with insurance. And you have these different periods, period 1, 2, and 3, and there are different insurance coverages. So, for instance, period 1 is when the app is on, but there's no ride accepted. The basic premise here is that private insurance does not cover you when you are out making money in your car. And so when do you change from personal to commercial? So is it when you turn the Uber app on but you haven't accepted a ride? Or is it when you accept a ride? Or is it when a passenger is in your car? And so various scenarios there. And the difficulty of this is Uber has said, well, we have a contingent policy for, I believe it's policy for number 1, for when you've turned the app on and you haven't accepted a ride yet. And if your personal policy won't cover then. And then we have a primary insurance for periods 2 and 3 once you accept and ride. Now, and I may be getting that slightly wrong, but there's a contingent policy, there's a final policy. I think what's important is that because Uber's insurance is evolving, this is a concern of theirs as well. In that insurance section, I have all sorts of, we have 2 public alerts from the Alaska State Department of Insurance, the 14 other states have issued similar alerts. But here are some of the questions. It's just not a simple, yes, we're covered, no, we're not. And the questions I'm getting this from are sort of in the middle of tab 5, and it's from, it's from DISB. It's a consumer guide. The article is Insurance Gaps Exist in Private Autos for Hire Services. It's not aimed at Uber or anybody else. But it says basically questions you may want to ask your insurance professional include, is there uninsured, underinsured coverage for when driver causes an accident but does not have enough or any insurance to pay? Is there comprehensive and collision coverage for physical damage to your auto that was not caused by an uninsured? Is there medical payments coverage or personal injury protection? When does the coverage under the Transportation Network Company policy begin and end? Will either the company policy or your personal auto policy pay your legal bills if you are sued? One of the things I started, I think, grasping was that in the final, when you actually have someone in your car, that there should be $1 million Uber policy. Uber steps in, has $1 million policy. I think really pretty much assuming that your personal policy isn't going to cover at that point in time. And but that's third-party liability. That doesn't cover the car, the driver's car, the Uber driver's car, or it may not. Sometimes we see that it does and sometimes not. Uber has provided a contingent policy to us. I don't think we've seen their final policy. There's articles here where Uber has said it's proprietary and they won't provide it. So I think the insurance issue is something that can be nailed down. In period 1, 2, and 3, what about uninsured? What about this? What about that? And that's just an exercise I think the Department of Law does owe to Uber, that let's just get straight, what are the answers to those policies? But I don't think the average Uber driver has any appreciation for the fact that they are very uncovered during some of these periods without Uber, so that Uber coverage is important, and that their car, they get in a car accident, even when they have a ride and have an Uber insurance, their car may or may not be covered, their injuries may or may not be covered. In other words, it's aimed at third-party liability. So these are things we have to nail down in the insurance world. Lots of lawsuits nationwide on the insurance issue. Again, I think Uber is evolving. The tail end of section number, I believe it's 5, you'll see, there's a case about Uber is being sued because what they say about insurance is misleading. Again, I think we would have the duty just to nail those questions down now that we know what the questions are. But at the very end of that is a policy that Mr. Musser helped to provide. Certain private insurance carriers are now stepping in to address this need. USAA is doing it in Colorado and Texas, and I think that's because Uber said, "Hey, we're going to give income opportunities to some very large number of veterans, 40,000 veterans." And so USAA, which of course is a veteran insurance group, said, "Okay, we're going to cover this." And there's another group behind there. Progressive is doing it in another state. So the private insurers are moving in that direction.
And Mr. Evans had a question, I believe.
Just real quick, you indicated there's some areas that we need to nail down still. You've been engaged in these negotiations since November. It's now middle of March. Why is it still that these aren't nailed down?
Well, you're absolutely correct. We spend an inordinate amount of time on background checks and the public safety issues. And I think we have enough information, and we've had our risk department look at this, that we could very quickly, and they have an insurance person, just say, okay, here are the 3 periods, here are the 10 questions, and fill it out, check the blanks, and show us that this is true.
So Ms. Traney, do you have a question?
No.
Is the sticky point for me, and I know each state has their own insurance commission, I believe, or insurance division. In Alaska, through your research, currently does our private carriers, and maybe you don't know all of them yet, but do our private carriers or does the state say that the insurance carriers can say if it's personal insurance on your private vehicle, and then all of a sudden, whether you turn the app on or you've agreed in principle to have that app to be a driver, I mean, at what point do you become required by state law to have commercial insurance if you're going to be a for hire? At what point? Has somebody said that?
Dean, would you know how to answer that?
Well, from what I've read for Alaska, and I don't get this from the Division of Insurance, but it's reverse statutes, a vehicle in Alaska is registered as either a personal private vehicle or commercial. There's no mixed use registration. And the insurance that's required by our insurance laws for vehicles, it doesn't delineate either. It doesn't have a mixed use coverage. It's commercial. We have commercial level coverage, which I believe is 200, 500 for the state. If it's personal, we have our personal coverage requirements, 50, 100, 45. Mr. Musser might know a little more about that.
Mr. Musser, do you have that information? Make sure your light is on. I can barely hear you, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry, to the chair, I know I have the same information that Dean has. That's, there's no mixed use applicability. State law is the same, even, it's just the same. If you switch to commercial use of a vehicle, or a commercial application, you have to have commercial coverage. And so That's
So my question, and this is through, and maybe Uber's representatives might know or someone, my question would be, and I've not personally experienced it, but I had a friend who had a vehicle that they bought a large truck, and they were driving it for themselves, but then one day they decided to make a little money to pay the gas or something, and they charged somebody $100 to move something, and they got in a car crash. And so they went to the person and said, hey, I was doing this for you, so you probably ought to help pay the damages. And the minute they reported that, their personal insurance said, well, you never told us it was a for-hire vehicle, and they shut them down. I mean, they literally told them they were no longer covered on that truck. And then they were stuck without any coverage. They denied any claim to the actual damages to both his vehicle, the other person's vehicle, and any injury. So in that case, would Uber's insurance say, well, if they didn't cover us and we don't either, or they didn't cover us so now we do? I mean, I guess that's the question. I'm looking out for the interest of the public. I mean, in a way, I don't really care what the driver makes out with his car, but I am really concerned about public's health.
Yeah, and I think Uber is answering that their contingent policy would cover if the personal policy does not cover. I think we need to go the next level, though, is what coverages does it cover? You have 5 or 6 different types of coverages. So it's not simply that it does cover. Does it, in fact, cover uninsured? One of the things we did notice about the contingent policy is it has lower than commercial standards, what we would require of our cabbies. Then their primary, when you have someone in the ride, that's $1 million coverage. But they said, well, because the first periods or two are less risk, they're not really commercial, they're really more personal. I mean, I would think that that's something we can address. But no, but your risk is very real, and same with renting out your campers, all sorts of things. And there's, I think, an article in here from Hawaii where they're warning people, the minute you do this, be careful. And so it seems to me that this is someplace where we have to exercise some oversight. And if I can continue, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman?
please.
We also included in this is the National Association of Mutual Insurance Companies. So we've been in contact with them, and they represent some majority percentage of insurers in Alaska. And they have a page in here, it's AMIC, about halfway through, that says they identify what they think are problems with this, and all the same problems we're discussing, and then what they would put in the MOU. And I guess, again, to Mr. Evans' question about why is this taking so much time, I think also because Uber's insurance policies are evolving as these issues come up. And that we have to, it's not just as simple when you drive your personal vehicle, you're not going to have coverage.
Yeah. Mr. Evans had a question.
Yeah, with respect to that, and this whole industry is evolving, and things are changing, and insurance companies are coming on board. But based on the information I received from the Portland study, it looks like, and this is just random cities that were surveyed, but that TNCs, Uber or others, are operating legally in Baton Rouge, in California, in Chicago, in Columbus, in Houston, King County, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, New York City, Seattle, Tulsa, Virginia. I would imagine all of those cities have concerns about the safety of their citizens too, and somehow they are able to come to terms that insurance is covered and all these other issues. So I suspect there must be a way that Anchorage can also manage to be among those cities that can find these terms. Do you not believe so?
Through the chair, I do. There have been other jurisdictions, though, that post bringing Uber and the other TNCs in are now engaged in litigation over these issues. But I think, Mr. Evans, we have enough experience nationally to come to an answer.
Okay. Yeah, Ms. Ennis, if you
Continue. And Dean, I didn't know if you wanted to add any at this point before
I would just add on the insurance question, as Ms. Ennis mentioned, several states are evolving legislation to address it. California recently passed a bill, Florida recently proposed one, and there are statewide concerns for the insurance issues. generally, I think if there's legislation that has a requirement, then we have clear guidance. Here in Alaska, we don't have that. Not sure how it will play out. I have suggested to Uber's representatives some state law changes would be needed here in Alaska. See. I think also, I'm sorry, the one other issue is our issue of impasse is mostly with that phase 1 period where the app has been turned on and the drivers are waiting for a ride request, but hasn't accepted one. So the phase 2, when a request is accepted and they're on the way or when they have a passenger, those haven't been as much of an issue, although there are insurance ambiguities out there. But the issue with our MOU has been mostly that phase 1. Initially, Uber said they didn't want to cover it. Later, I think early January, they provided a contingent policy. The contingent policy they provided has limits that are the same as personal private vehicle coverage limits. And the municipality's position is, well, you're still sort of commercially involved here. You're ready for business. You're waiting for requests. And our position has been that the coverage should be similar to other vehicles for hire, which is higher than the 50-125 coverage for a personal private vehicle. So we're still at that real issue with the coverage amounts for just that phase 1. And I wanted to add one other thing about persons and their coverage. Although you maybe have a personal policy and Uber's contingent policy, I've looked at some drivers' blogs out there from across the country that talk about driving for Uber or Lyft and other TNCs. And what happens often is they're in an accident and they're in that gray area, the phase 1 period. It becomes a fight between the insurance companies, and that takes a bit of time. Meanwhile, the person's injured, the vehicle's damaged, nobody's paying for it, so you've got a bit of lag time. Or otherwise, if you just had a clear insurance policy, your private vehicle that you were in an accident in, it would be very quick and smooth to recover from. So that's an issue, I think, of concern.
Would that be a recommendation from the law department that we have clear insurance directive? Well, yes, we would like clear insurance direction. The Department of Law's position has been that phase 1 period have the same coverage required in Title 11. Thank you.
But if we want to budge from that position, we would like guidance.
Thank you.
And the last two sections, one is disability access, the issue of whether what type of disability services Uber and the TNCs need to provide. They've generally agreed to most areas of this. Most of this. The one question is wheelchair accessible is probably the remaining issue. Of course, a big issue, and we included in the materials at least one lawsuit that's going forward where they're being sued on that issue. I think the way most jurisdictions or many are handling it is some type of surcharge per vehicle per ride, which is then contributed to the taxi cabs or some other part of the city to convert other cabs, the regular cabbies into. So there's probably a financial way to solve that problem. But it's a real issue. It's not something that the city should ignore. Okay. And then Dean just pointed out that I missed a few of these. Let's see. Vehicle inspections required. Dean, would you handle that one?
Yeah, we had vehicle inspections. Well, initially, we see some other jurisdictions requiring an age limit on the Uber vehicles. In general, we have not had an issue with inspections being conducted by a certified mechanic following a checklist. That's okay. The issue has been mostly how often should that be done? Initially, before a vehicle can drive, Uber agrees with that. That's not an issue. But it's how old could the vehicle be and how often should inspections occur? We have relied on the transportation inspector for guidance there. Every 6 months, initially, and perhaps an age limit on vehicles. If Uber is going to have oversight over the vehicles and their inspections, then if that's on their end, it's more comfortable to have an age limit and mileage limit on the vehicles. You want quality vehicles, Uber does as well. But what we have seen is they would prefer a 10-year age limit. It's probably the first of 7. Perhaps it doesn't really matter that much. I just wanted to point out that's an issue that we haven't come to agreement on here. Let's see. Then there was the record reporting as well. This is a pilot program, and we should be able to have data where we can evaluate what's happening, how many rides are offered, how it's impacting the market, and what kind of further regulation or less regulation is needed. But you need data to have that. We had record reporting for the number of trips, and for example, a chauffeur, how many calls per hour, pickup, drop-off locations, trip time, cost for disability service, certain data like that, canceled calls, errors. Uber's position is this type of data is generally proprietary. They would allow, for example, an audit of the records, but didn't really agree to regular record reporting, monthly or quarterly, with certain data. So the municipality is not requesting particularly private identifying information or something that would be considered proprietary. There is neutral and objective data which should be disclosed regularly, particularly for a pilot program.
And on that note, and maybe Mr. Musser or even Chief Fanning here, I was just having a thought. Oftentimes, particularly for criminal activity, a robbery, a burglary occurs, somebody runs, a witness says, I thought the guy got in a cab, it looked like that. At least there's ways that you can get information from the data record point as to where they dropped the person off and follow up on that. I know that that's a tool that's been used in the past for police, but Mr. Musser, is that an indication of what record-keeping data or is your staff interested in? Is it complaint as a result of a complaint driven, or trying to verify rates? If somebody says I got overcharged, can you look at the record and tell where they picked up, dropped off, and what it should have been? What's the importance of the records?
Thank you. Data from the records is used for a variety of reasons.
Can you move the mic just a little closer? There you go.
You need to take part up here.
There you go. Right
from the area of a complaint, and I'm sure that wouldn't be a problem going to obtain the specific data to resolve an issue if it was a fair run-up or we're looking from a robbery. The data, and we'll have it for Friday for the members to see. The importance of the data, getting it on a regularly basis, is primarily for internal research to answer policy questions, for example, service to the disability community. Prior to the amendments to the ordinance in 2013, the municipality, we were just receiving anything, and it was difficult to make policy determinations. Having access to the data now has enabled us to very clearly see patterns of absmal service or non-service to certain areas, both geographically and demographically. And I think it's important to have that data, on a continuing basis, so that so that we can see that if changes need to be made down the road, in some other situation.
Chief, any position on it?
As long as we could, like you said, we'd have to have some kind of system set up there where we can have access to that information to help us, I think, to solve those type cases.
I've asked Dean if he would cover dynamic pricing.
Any other questions or comments?
This might be one of our last items on page 5 of that table. We have dynamic pricing. Now, in the ordinance, there's a direction to address dynamic pricing in times of emergencies, inclement weather, major public events, things like that. Uber's position is it's very important to be market-driven so that supply and demand can match with the number of drivers on the road and so forth. But the municipalities view there needs to be some kind of limitation because the stories you hear across the country about price gouging, and the example we have on the table is a 3 times factor could have a ride to Eagle River costing $120 or more, for example. Perhaps when citizens are at bar closing hour, not paying very close attention, next day find, a multi-$100 bill for a ride when they were trying to be safe by not driving. That just doesn't seem quite fair. So just from a public safety standpoint, we're not opposed to having dynamic pricing in place, but what kind of limits? So Uber has agreed when an emergency is declared by the governor or mayor that they would disable dynamic pricing. Otherwise, we think there should be some kind of cap on how high the factor can go. So that's an issue that we didn't get to discuss too thoroughly since we have these other public safety issues with the licensing and other requirements.
Mr. Evans had a question.
Yeah, and it's not about dynamic pricing, but just generally, we've got the list of the areas where you haven't been able to gain agreement. I was just wondering if you can give us a sense of some of the areas where you have reached agreement with Uber in getting this MOA.
I don't have a table for that, Mr. Evans. You see. I do appreciate Uber's participation in negotiations. They did a lot of the drafting work for the MOU. I think that one area of agreement is TNCs can be licensed in the municipality. We're not opposed to them operating. The fee hasn't been an issue that they've raised. The ordinance that's up, I guess, for a work session Friday had a 15,000 TNC fee. It's similar to Columbus, as Cincinnati, and some other jurisdictions. So the TNC operating, having a fee, and so forth has not been too much of an issue. We've been able to agree that people can use an app to respond to ride requests, provide transportation. The innovation is quite amazing, of course, and there's nothing in opposition to having them operate here in Anchorage. I know I'm being rather generalistic here, but what was more important is those big public safety concerns where we haven't reached agreement. I think those main 5 where we've pointed out we have an impasse, if we can get some clear direction on those, it wouldn't be too difficult to get through any other issues.
All right, I believe, is that it?
If I could just,
Yes, please.
I appreciate that, Mr. Gates, but what it sounds like is that basically Uber's agreed to the licensing fee, which is probably the highest licensing fee for any city of comparable size in the United States, and that the municipality has agreed that an app-based transportation network company can use an app. Is there anything else that we can point to that is an issue that we've taken off the table that we've already agreed to in reaching some sort of ordinance or memorandum of understanding?
If I could answer. I mean, there are smaller areas, vehicle inspections, for instance. There are smaller areas within all of these. What the negotiations really led to was an identity of the issues that are community issues that we can't proceed with until we know what the answers are in terms of drugs and fingerprints. That those are community issues. And so I guess I would say I think once some of these issues were decided, it would move along very, very quickly. The MOU is not difficult, but it was trying to negotiate these issues. And when, again, we spent hours and hours on background checks, and finally, and also on drug testing, and Mr. Gates and I just said, we've got to bring this back to the Assembly. We can't just keep having the same argument. It's not our call.
Thank you. I think what we need to do is open up. We've got quite a few members in the audience here, and I would ask that we give at least representatives from Uber and representatives from POA, I think it is, a few minutes, if you would, just to address material that you've handed. I'm thinking you've already got a copy of what was presented here to the members of the body. So if you'd like to come to the podium here, if you would, make sure the green light is lit. Just identify yourself for the record, sir, and we don't have a lot of time, and we're scheduled till 2, I believe, but I know there's some people that might want to speak, so if you could just give us maybe a summary of what you're hearing, and then I really am interested in what Uber's position of how you'd like to operate in our community. I'm curious.
Yeah, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. My name is Bryce Bennett, and I am the manager for Uber here in Alaska. I want to thank the staff. We obviously have had a lot of meetings and talked through quite a few issues in the last few months. What I would really like to do, and I won't be able to address everything that's been talked about in the last hour, if I could just disperse this information to you.
Sure. That's fine. We'll pass them through.
Back here. So, to address, Mr. Holman, your questions, our opinion is the proposals for many of the requirements outlined to you today are unfortunately onerous for not only the driver, but will limit transportation options for riders here in Anchorage under the model. I think we've had an opportunity to express our opinion on background checks, insurance. We provided both the contingent and primary insurance policies to the city of Anchorage. We actually, I think in November, took care of that. We've also worked through every aspect of our operation, how we work through providing accountability for riders through the application, as well as how we work to onboard drivers. Speaking to these safety pieces, which I think are probably more where the focus is today, I will remind and go through them again, but we proactively employ rigorous safety standards on driver safety. All Uber ride-sharing partners must go through a stringent 3-step background check that is a court record poll based on a Social Security trace for that background check. It goes back 7 years for the DMV check, as well as a local, county, and multi-state check. We also do a National Sex Offender Registry and a Fair Credit Reporting Act check as well. National Sex Offender Registry. It's under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Screening for Uber drivers is just the beginning of our safety efforts. Our process includes prospective and regular checks of drivers' motor vehicle records to ensure ongoing safe driving. In addition, from the time a driver accepts a trip request through our app until the completion of the ride, our partners have $1 million of primary commercial insurance. And that is from the time that they accept the trip on their application or on their smartphone to the time that rider gets out of the car. We were also the first ride-sharing request service to include $1 million in coverage for uninsured and underinsured motorists during that time, meaning that passengers and drivers are also covered for injuries when another party is at fault and lacks sufficient insurance. This $1 million, as I said, kicks in from trip acceptance to drop-off and is consistent across cities. Further, we also have a contingent insurance policy, which is, I think, what we were referring to just a little bit earlier. If they do have any issue during the initial application but before they've received a request time period, we have a contingent policy that kicks in if they have any issues with their personal insurance provider. We have not had any of those issues operating in the state of Alaska. I hope that at least answers a few of the questions, and I'm happy to take more, but I would like to remind everyone that we have been running a pilot program here for the better part of 5 months. We provided tens of thousands of trips in the city of Anchorage without major incident, and really allowed for almost close to 100 small businesses to leverage the platform to make a living. Further, we saw thousands of riders use the service to get home at bar break, and thousands others to go to school, go to work. If it was raining outside and they didn't want to walk through downtown, we see a wide variety of uses. And this is another transportation option, not a replacement for the current transportation options in a city. I think that is shown in multiple, 295 cities now worldwide. I would like to correct just a few things in the chart, and apologize not to get too detailed, but there are a couple of things in regards to drug testing and fingerprinting that I'd like to point out. Maybe it'd be easier to via email in regards to what other cities require, including the city of Chicago, as well as California, and then I can speak to Houston if there's any questions on that. But I appreciate the time to address these, the committees. If I can answer any questions, please let me know.
Any questions from the body? Mr. Trey.
Mr. Bennett, as it relates to fingerprinting, how many cities have you agreed to fingerprinting? We're not the only one that does this or requires it.
Assemblymember Training, thank you for the question. In Houston is where there's currently fingerprinting. New York is a different, New York is a base system, which is why it's listed on here. It's a little bit different regulatory framework. Chicago UberX partners, drivers, do not go through fingerprinting. So we're really talking about Houston. New York's, like I said, a different kind of regulatory framework given its size. But Houston, and that is, to my knowledge, the city that we have agreed to. And it's, I think, important to note that in Houston, there's actually no competition because Lyft and Sidecar were not able to operate under those regulations.
Can you then give me the framework or the copy of the ordinance that Houston has that deals with fingerprinting? Because I want to see how that relates to what we want. Because from my perspective, I do want fingerprinting because I want to make sure we know who the driver is in the background check. And fingerprint's the only way to really find out who it is.
Assemblymember Training, happy to work on the Houston piece for you.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Speaking to the broader reach of background checks, I think it is important to know that we do use a court-based background check system, not relying on usually outdated databases to pull those. I think an article just recently ran here in Alaska on how outdated Absent is in the state of Alaska. Further, FBI databases have been proven to not be as accurate and updated on a regular basis. So we actually go straight to court records to pull this information. Further, you're not always when you are fingerprinted, you're not always fingerprinted for a crime or a traffic violation or whatever it might be. And court records do pull those instances.
Ms. Gray-Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, and thanks you to everyone else in the audience for being here this afternoon. So what is Uber's issue with drug testing?
Thank you, Assemblymember. With drug testing, we view it as basically a one point in time check. As I think everyone knows, drug testing is not fully 100% effective. What we utilize is a zero tolerance policy on drugs and alcohol. And what we do, and if you're not familiar with our system, is there's a constant feedback loop. Every trip a driver does on the platform, the rider has to leave feedback, and they have the opportunity to do that directly in the application through email as well. And so what we do is if we hear of anything, whether it be I had an issue with my driver and it may have involved something like a illegal substance or alcohol, anything like that, it's an immediate removal from the platform. And what we can do is actually pick those up in real time. We have a 24/7 team that is an incident response team that does nothing worldwide but just respond to these issues. And we do millions of trips on a daily basis, so it's very critical that we do act quickly on these things. We then do a full investigation to the validity of that account from the rider and follow up with the driver locally with the operations team.
Ms. Gray-Jackson, a follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't going to bring this up, but since you're here, I am. So I was just in D.C., and I had a Uber ride from the hotel to the airport. It was really great. It was cheaper. It was great. I had a student with me on this, my visit to D.C. for a conference, and her experience was not so great. I don't want to get into details, but the driver basically harassed her, told her what kind of women he likes, and then asked her out for a drink. So my question is, how do you deal with situations like that? I heard that she could report it to Uber, but how do you really deal with situations like that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Assemblymember Gray Jackson, thank you for the question. Obviously, don't have specific knowledge of the issue you're referring to, but in the case of something like that, we view that as a serious or egregious feedback from a rider. It would follow a very similar process to what I just outlined in regards to how we would follow up immediately by removing the access to the platform. We have operations teams dedicated to every single major city and region in this country that are literally able to focus directly on those kinds of things and reach out to the driver as well as the rider to ensure that we follow up to the fullest extent and make sure we get to the bottom of what did happen.
If I can follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I could give you details after the meeting, okay?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
I'm happy to give you details after the meeting. Thank you.
Assemblymember, thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the body? Thank you, Mr. What was your last name again?
Bennett.
Bennett, Mr. Bennett.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
We may have some further comments or questions, so if you want to, feel free to stick around.
No problem.
Mr. Brennan, is there anything from that poll that you'd like to share with the body? Let us know what your positions on these are.
I'll try, Mr. Chairman. I realize you have limited time. Jim Brennan for Anchorage Taxicab Permit Owners Association. The Department of Law was tasked with what I see as an impossible task, and it's sort of an impossible task for you folks in a short time frame to get your arms around these issues. There are so many public safety and consumer protection issues embodied in what this assembly has developed over 50 years in Anchorage that it's impossible to go over them today. What the Department of Law appears to have done is tried to come back to you with a sort of a regulation light, a public safety light, a consumer protection light, and Uber wouldn't even step up to the table on that. They got into an impasse on multiple issues. I cannot, and I have to say I was troubled, if I understood Mr. Gates' initial point here, was that the department did not want to have public safety be a barrier to entry to Uber. Why not? Why shouldn't it be? It's a barrier to entry for anybody who wants to operate a taxi cab in non-compliance with this Assembly's public safety laws. I'm not even, I'll try to go through, I'm going to start with what I see as the most important public safety issue here, which is insurance. That's definitely for the protection of the public and also the Uber drivers. Because if there's an accident, there needs to be adequate insurance coverage. This municipality has established what those levels of insurance coverage need to be. They need to be commercial insurance policies, not personal policies. By the way, personal policy, Ms. Ennis said there was, an issue as to when that kicks in. I deal with insurance companies on behalf of claimants all the time, and if there is an issue to raise, an exclusion, you can count on them to raise it. If you are an Uber driver and you have the app on and you're out there, even if you haven't picked up a customer, you're in commercial operation and you're going to be subject to an exclusion under your personal policy. No ifs, ands, or buts, and that will stand up in court and has stood up in court. And so then we get into the question is, okay, well, what about the standby Uber policy? Well, to the extent that it's a contingent policy, there's another issue there, because contingent insurance policies, I don't know if any of you have had this personal experience, they are conditioned on there being an effective primary coverage. If the driver's primary coverage is not effective because subject to exclusion, then the contingent policy is out the window. There's many gray areas here. Uber says, well, we have a primary coverage for this and a contingent coverage for that. They're hoping your eyes are going to glaze over because, insurance issues, we all have trouble following all this. But the easy answer is just follow the same laws that are required of taxi cabs. How difficult can that be? And again, even the Uber policy itself, the one they submitted to the city here, to the Department of Law, it's the James River policy. It contains, and I believe the representative described this rather quickly here, from the time of acceptance by the driver to drop-off. Okay, but it's not covering them from the time the app is turned on till the time of acceptance. That's where this famous case of the 6-year-old in San Francisco was killed, and Uber's carrier, the same one that submitted to Anchorage, James River, said, we're not covering that because it was not within the coverage period of pickup to drop-off. So the other thing about insurance and about so many of these requirements is the city, under your existing laws for taxi cabs, is guarding the hen house. Insurance policies have to be submitted to the transportation inspector's office. He has to know at all times. There's a cancellation, has to know immediately. Has to know that any licensed cab out there is insured. Uber would handle these things in-house, not only on insurance, on background checks. They want you to say, let us do it. Well, the municipality over all these years has not said to the taxi cab industry, you can do this yourself, we'll trust you. You can do your background checks. You know, you can get the insurance and just handle it in-house, make sure you do it. Drug testing, you handle that in-house. One-time drug testing for Uber. The municipality on taxi cabs has periodic drug testing. They have incident drug testing where there's an incident, and they have random drug testing. You know, a one-time drug testing policy is hardly worth the paper it's written on. Same thing with driver training. You know, the chauffeur's licensing requirement, as I think was pointed out by the department, it's not a minor thing. There's a lot of things wrapped up in that. The municipality requires training of taxi cab drivers. And that includes on safe driving, safe vehicle maintenance, knowledge of the city and its locations, driver personal safety, elements of successful tourism and visitor service, knowledge of regulations concerning drug alcohol testing and driver appearance and behavior. There's a check ride training thing. Why are these not something that the municipality, as opposed to Uber, shouldn't be doing with Uber drivers? The background checks, instead of a one-time only check, which is what Uber does, taxi cab drivers are subject to background checks on every renewal of their license, and they're subject to revocation if they become subject of a felony or misdemeanor conviction within 5 years for larceny, fraud, theft, or embezzlement. They're also, taxi drivers are subject to loss of their license if they're convicted within 12 months of a moving violation which subjects the license to possible revocation. Why isn't this to be required of Uber drivers? What's the difference? There is no difference. The taxi cab drivers in Anchorage are using an electronic app system that's no different from what Uber is doing. Yes, the taxi cab dispatch companies also do it the old-fashioned way, where somebody calls on the phone and is dispatched a ride, but it's set up with both dispatch companies that you can do the same thing Uber's doing. So why are we talking about giving Uber these loopholes that you can literally drive a Mack truck through? You know, on drug alcohol use, taxi cabs.
If I can get you to kind of summarize some things, your points there.
Yeah, I apologize.
Don't worry. I understand.
That's
fine.
I'm just getting started, believe me. I think what I should do is maybe do what Uber just did, give you a handout. I previously gave you, sent to you by email, but it's been a while back, 2 side-by-sides. We did our own side-by-side that is more extensive, and I think what the Department of Law has done here is just scratched the surface of the differences. But I will again send you a comparison of services, Uber rides versus Anchorage taxi cabs, and then a separate one, comparison of insurance responsibility, Uber versus taxi cabs. And it goes through and it's charted to the specific requirements of existing Anchorage ordinance. I think if I launch into another subject, I'm going to take too much of your time. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Brennan, I would definitely like to see your comparison notes, and I know you did send us some documents in the past. If there's something that you have, and I'm sure since time began here with this coverage and this issue, you may have compiled other information. So it would be helpful to the members of this body if you could just maybe submit those to the clerk so they can distribute to all of us. That would be great.
I'll do so. I've only got one copy here, but I will get those over today.
That would be wonderful. Just through email? Yeah, either way. And any questions from the body? Okay, it doesn't appear to be at this point, but thank you so much. Appreciate it. So I know there's a lot of folks here, and we're going to be limited on time. We got about 29 minutes till adjournment. So I would ask that it's audience participation. If you could just identify yourself and stick to the topic, please, and we'll let you know. Excuse me.
Mark Marion, former Alaska Yellow Cab dispatcher and a member of Anchorage's 12th Man. And I will tell you this right now, as somebody who has been in this industry for over 10 years, what we just heard is not 100% correct. Here's an interesting question. While I was living upstairs from one of the cab companies, we don't have dispatch training at the dispatch companies. I can tell you that right now. And it probably still doesn't. You know, unless you have a first responder attitude, they have no clue how to respond to a taxi driver emergency. I don't know how many times I got calls on either my cell phone or how many calls I had gotten. Now, luckily, see, now I put it on, or how many calls I got from my landline from an overnight graveyard dispatcher. How do I do this? How do I do this? When Dale Bacorny died on January 30th from Susie's thing, which I can tell you, I'm sorry about that.
He was killed by a drunk driver.
He was killed by a drunk driver, if I remember correctly.
Mr. Marion, if you could summarize, because we're going to have a lot of people here, and if you could just summarize your point, please.
The point is, dispatch companies need to have first responder training. That means Anchorage Fire Department, Anchorage Police Department needs to certify every taxi cab dispatcher, period. That includes Uber, even though they are computerized still. Mark Marion, member of Anchorage 12th Man.
Thank you, Mr. Marion. All right, folks, just in the interest of time, how many people here are interested in making a comment today? How many people, gives you raise a hand? I know the people are standing. Okay. We're going to try to stick this to a minute, please, because we have some comments and members would like to make at the end. So if you could just kind of summarize your point, I appreciate it. And I'm timing.
Hi, my name's Susie Smith, and I'm a taxi permit owner operator. A couple things I think we missed in this safety thing, and one of them is the number of hours of operation for the Uber drivers. Currently, we're held to a standard or a certain number of hours that our drivers can drive, and I think that's important for you guys to pay attention to because I've been told there are drivers driving for a lot of hours. The other thing is the medical is a big deal. We have had several drivers lose their license because they were not able to renew based on some sort of thing, but then the next day are driving for Uber. So these are things that should not be overlooked, that are safety concerns. And commercial policy is, I'm going to jump on that real quick. Commercial policy, not only is there then coverage that we know is in place 24 hours, 7 days a week, but beyond that, I submit to our carrier any driver that is to be added to our policy, they scrutinize their driving records. So there are people in this audience that I know are driving for Uber that are not insurable under my policy. And so it's not just coverage for 24 hours a day, but it's also, if they don't have a good record, they shouldn't be on the road. So just a couple extra points I think that were missed.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. And I would encourage anybody, if you have a point you'd like to make, today just isn't the only time you can reach out and contact us. So you can contact the municipal clerk's office, go online. We're all available there. We have our phone numbers and emails listed as well.
Hello, my name is Arben Lina. I'm a taxi permit owner and operator. I just want to make a few comments to what Uber's representative alluded to when it comes to their background checks. Well, their background checks, they say they go through the court records. Well, each municipality, has its court records, but they're within that entity, or they're controlled by, if you're going to be a member, subscribe to a site to get information on that. But when we wrote the rewrite, recently, we went through that strenuous time, and I remember, Mr. Trainee, LV, Assemblyman Honeman, they said that, no, we need to do a little bit more when it comes to the safety of the riders. We need to come up with not just a state background check, because there was some problems where there was drivers that drove in other states and municipalities, and they came here, they got a state record from the state of Alaska, the state troopers, and they came clean, they were driving. Well, come to find out, they were wanted in other states like the state of Connecticut. Well, Mr. Honeman suggested that we come up with something strenuous where it protects the riders. And one of those things, I'll tell you, one of those things that our background, not only is FBI mandated, fingerprints, iris, and to get an ID from JBear, that's what you have to go through. And what he alluded that the FBI mandated background is obsolete. This is minutia, There's no way the safety of the ridership by this safety committee and by this assembly members, can be, where disregarded and just take their words for it. And when it comes to the other insurance, that's my other point is, our insurance is always in full.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Well, we'd love to hear from you more.
My policy is 24/7.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. All right. And I'm starting the time after you identify yourself, so I apologize. Ms. Taylor, Ms. Smith, I'm sorry I didn't give you, you probably went an extra few seconds. Okay.
Yes, hello, Dave O'Malley, involved in both taxi and Uber. I've been involved in this industry over 30 years, and I think Mr. Brennan and a few others the municipal lawyers here have made a point. The taxi industry in Anchorage is a mess. It always has been. And Uber is doing us a favor by basically saying how it should be run. They do everything on their own. What goes on with the municipality, with the TI, is just chaos. I also like to bring up a point with Portland. I know Portland pretty well. My daughter went to school down there. She lives down there. Portland, for the last 20 years, have been staying above the curb, trying to, anyway, on public transportation. They intermingle the cab industry. They don't have the complaints. The people actually like the cab industry in Portland. Uber's down there now, but the people actually stood up. In Anchorage, people, basically, all I hear is complaints. If I'm driving a cab, or if I'm driving Uber, the people can't stand the cab industry in Anchorage. They can't stand the dispatchers, the companies, the drivers, and the equipment. So let's thank Uber. They're really showing us how it's supposed to be done.
Thank you, Mr. O'Malley.
Thank you.
My name is Eugene Haberman. I represent myself. As you know, I monitor public process. And I'd like to compliment Assemblymember Holdeman, Trainee, and Jackson. When you spoke today, I could understand what you were saying. You project yourself well. But I couldn't say that for the bulk of the first 70 minutes of this meeting, where two members representing the Muni's case, it was unclear what was being said with regard to Uber. This is not the way to hold a public meeting. I understand one problem was someone couldn't use the microphone well. In another case, I'm sorry, but if the public can't understand what's being presented at the meeting, this is not a legit meeting. Now, further is, I'm greatly concerned that 1-minute ruling here. You standard is 3 minutes, 5 minutes for organizations. State law requires a reasonable opportunity to be heard at all public meetings. You're not doing it at this meeting. You're cutting it to 1 minute. You broke the state law and your own rules. And then I would make a note of this meeting. I continue to witness web notification fraud. This is concluding my comments. Which I mean, on this meeting, you pretend to have a date of a notice. You change it, but pretend the original date is when you put the changes in. That's what we call web fraud. You've been served, notified on this situation, and it continues to happen. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Kevin Rustin, taxi driver. I realize you folks have basically a Solomon-like decision to make when it regards this whole industry, but I would like to remind you that these rules and regulations not only put in place by many of the people that are actually present here, but for the people that came before you, and none of them are trivial. I certainly don't think any of them are onerous. We're all for as much less regulation as possible, but there are some real legitimate concerns that may even not appear apparent to people immediately right now. But there's 50 years of industry use of reasons why they were necessary. As a father of 2 daughters, I would especially like to, the public safety issues are very important, the background check issues, all the concerns. What something as trivial as public markings of the cabs. I have those 2 daughters. I like to keep them safe. There's already too many missing women in Anchorage. We don't need more. We don't need this MOU turning into a serial killer enabling act.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
My name is Nasir Chima. I'm a taxi permit owner and driver. I only want to say one thing. Last time I talked in one of the committee meeting in the city, Mr. Evan also said that he gave us the equal opportunity, same way with them. So next month my chauffeur license is to renew. I received the notice. It's going to cost me $250. Can I drive just my cab with my driving license like them? I have an ID. Why not? Same with the insurance. I pay $6,812 for 1 year on my cab insurance, which is covered even if I go by my personal use, buy grocery or whatever. They should be held to standard same way. Same, I'm paying $2,050 each car Uber puts, that's equal to each cab. I'm paying $2,050 to renew the permit. They should pay too. Why not? Same, I even forget about it. I pay the city $70,000 to buy that permit, forget that. But that's all I have to say, Mr. Horniman. I don't want to take too much of your time.
We'd love to hear more from you. Just reach out to any or all of us. I would appreciate it. And thank you for your input.
My name is Mike Potter. I do a lot of cab installations of the safety equipment that Title 11 requires us to have. The computers, the digital dispatch systems, GPS. So y'all say that they won't share the information. I could call the dispatch company, any of them, and get any information just like the cops can. When the person got picked up, no. Everybody's worried about safety? Yes, we take safety serious. Insurance. I've already replaced 6 cars on insurance this month. Their cars, there's no insurance policy. Commercial insurance is a requirement. Yes. Let's make the playing field even. They want to join us, make them meet our recommendations. Title 11 states it right out, plain and simple. I sent 3 people to go get their chauffeur's licenses. I paid for the services. I got their fingerprints done, their criminal backgrounds done. They are now driving for different companies that require us to have chauffeur's licenses. Let's make them do the same.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, my name is David Coker. I drive for Yellow Cab. The problems I have is I have to pay $2,000 to renew a permit. I have to have my chauffeur's license. I have to have $500 worth of commercial insurance. That's what it costs me. I have to buy a permit from the city of Anchorage. I'm required to paint my car either yellow or orange. Without all these expenses, I could make a lot more money. I'm all for free enterprise. Good for Uber. Let them in here. However, if you let them in, they have to pay everything we have to pay.
Thanks, sir.
My name is George Michael Coker, Jr. I'm a lifetime resident of Anchorage, Alaska. 1970 was my first experience with this company pumping gas for tips in the cabs. I'd like to explain something to you. I've heard in my parents' living room for a long time, these same problems. There have been many companies that have come here and have tried to operate with us. This body, the Municipal Assembly, are the ones that write the rules for us. You have imposed these rules on us, and we have to comply with them. And as a fair game, anybody that comes into this industry should have to comply with those rules. For you to change them and open a door in competition with me when I have had to pay out hundreds of thousands of dollars to operate because of your rules, it makes it unfair. As far as the safety goes, I want to understand something. There is no guarantee in the safety of any cab driver out here. A camera, anything else like that, it's ultimately up to the sixth sense of the cab driver to be aware of what's going on out there. I've been attacked, I've had a gun pulled on me, and I'm very frustrated. You have a person that's designated to oversee this department, which is appointed by the mayor. He is helpless without your help. He cannot enforce the rules on very few cars. He needs help. You have a fleet of cars out there that have been out there operating on the roads of Anchorage before Uber ever got here, unlicensed, uninsured, and nobody does anything about it. He was directly involved in Valentino. So your municipal attorney took them to court. They showed up on the Sheraton. You have several of these operations out here that are unmarked.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
I just hope you do something and realize what we've had to put into it.
Hi, my name is Sliman bin Arouj. I'm owner and driver and operator for last 20 years. Yet, still, every year I have to pass that refreshment class and to go through medical exams. If I have any high blood pressure over the limit or something, I will lose my driver license and my permit that I bought from the city over $70,000. And I pay every year over $2,000 for renewal. Besides that, I have been dealing with insurance for so many years. The criteria to hire any driver, my insurance requires he has to be older than 24 years old. And he has to have at least 3 years driver license, plus some of cab driving experience. I would like to know what Uber can provide like this. I mean, he can have a driver license within 1 day. He will be driving Uber in next day and without any experience, without any liability for that.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. We got time for 2 more people, if we could. This gentleman.
My name's Justin. I drove for Uber until I pulled out. I've given almost about 1,000 rides in the few months that I've driven for them. About 200 times I've been told, usually by females that are traveling by themselves, that they don't feel safe in Anchorage cabs. Uber has a very high percentage of veterans. They actively search out veterans. They look for that honorable discharge, which is kind of proof that we'll treat women with respect. The gentleman here said that the taxi industry has an app and they're running the exact same thing. I think that if you were to compare our wait times with theirs, you would find that that's something a little different than true. That's a very good way to compare that. I would hope that we can get this stuff worked out. There's obvious need for public safety, but don't forget, please, I believe it was Mr. Trainee, after the unfortunate rape that took place by an on-duty cab driver several years ago, that had to introduce a thing to be voted on that prohibited people that have been charged with rape and not convicted yet from driving for the cab companies, because they wouldn't do it themselves. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Folks, we're really going to have to reduce this to the last couple people because we're running short on time for the end of the meeting. So, if you could summarize, sir.
How you doing? My name is Carl Guerra. I'm a taxi cab operator and driver. I just want to point out, Uber calls themselves an app, but yet we're comparing it to taxi cabs. They offer rides for commerce. They are a vehicle for hire. That is technically commercial. They should be held to every accountability that the cab should have to be for public safety. Yellow cab, checker cab, they don't get the chance to dictate where the background checks come from. They can't say we do our own The municipality dictates it. Everything should be in-house, everything should be to the same safety standards, cameras, background checks, drug checks, everything should be to the same standard. You can't, and this is, we talk about all these other cities and how they do it and how we can use them for templates, but this is municipality of Anchorage. This is all we all do here. This is all where we do business. We need to do by our own example, not so much for the other cities, but yeah, that's my piece. Thanks.
Thanks, sir.
My name is Sean Bryant. Something that I found amusing on New Year's Eve was a news story where Uber was described as an entity that has outsmarted the taxi business. Uber hasn't outsmarted the taxi business. We know what Uber is. Uber is a dispatch service for a gypsy cab company. They use terms like rideshare. When I think of the word rideshare, I think of two or more people sharing the expenses of a ride. The way Uber uses it, you give as many rides as possible and you charge a profit. That's the same thing as a taxi. So that's synonymous. The app that Yellow Cab has is really sophisticated. It's just like this. You can pay with a credit card. There doesn't have to be a transaction with the driver. And so to say that the cab company isn't a transportation network company would also be false. So it's the same thing. I'm not going to suggest, I'm really actually going to insist that equal treatment under the law is by right. If you have somebody muscling in on the business and then you say, oh, you're going to be subject to different rules, the money they've already spent with their drivers, with the free ride program, they could have already bought permits. They could have already leased permits, but they don't want to play by the rules because it's not their business plan. Anyways, I think that unless you suspend the law for everybody, that would be bad policy, or you enforce the law for everybody.
Thanks, sir. Lynette, you get the joy of being the last person in the audience to participate.
Thank you, Paul. My name is Lynette Marino Hines, and I've driven a taxi cab here in the city of Anchorage and Scenic Grove for 34 years. I was a safe driver, and I worked for a lot of different permit owners through the years. I raised my family and my grandkids now, and I'd like to say that I support Uber in all of its efforts because as a driver I could see that it's just a different option instead of driving a taxi cab, and it would be like if I wanted to go drive, Princess Cruises. I'd also like to state there's a lot of rumors. I have not driven for Uber, not 1 second, not at all. And I have an old car. It's a 2002 Subaru. It's a Outback. You have to have a vehicle that's at least 10 years or younger. And not only that, I was not fired from the municipality, and Mr. Musser can testify to that. I was suspended because I do have a medical condition, and it is diabetes. As soon as I can get that under control, I will probably go back to work. I don't know if it'll be in the taxi industry or what, but I'd like to clear that up. And also, in the city, I have seen a lot of different transportation, modes of transportation come and go here. There was a guy that was operating, and he would go to the airport with his shuttle van. He would pick up, and he was never taken off the road. He kept on doing this. He would offer from the airport to hotels, from residences to hotels, back and forth.
Can I get you to summarize, please?
Okay. So there has been lots of different modes of transportation in the city, and please just reconsider. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Lynette. Thanks for sharing. Member comments. There are 5 of us, I believe 6 of us here, so we can set a timer. Mr. Peterson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to point out something to make sure we all noticed it in this booklet that we were given today, that the state of Pennsylvania evidently is requiring that everyone that drives for Uber or any ride-sharing service write a letter to their insurance carrier to let them know that they are in fact driving for a ride-sharing service. So, and I'm not pro-insurance company. I don't work for any insurance company and never have, but I do think that actually makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Trainee? Ms. Gray-Jackson? Mr. Evans.
Yeah, briefly, Mr. Chair. I mean, I think, there's obviously two different views on this, very distinct views, and it really comes down to, how you want to regulate Uber, whether you want to regulate Uber. I personally don't want to, I would even like less regulations if possible. I don't want to own Uber's liability. I don't want the city to be telling people that Uber is safe and that they should ride Uber and they should feel comfortable. It's a private company. I want, let the public decide that. I just want the bare minimum of getting, safe cars and on the road. But I also agree with the people from the taxi industry that say that it's not fair that they have so many, regulations. I don't want to create another regulated entity. From what I've seen of the one we have, basically, we do anything and you get a threatening letter that's you're going to sue the city anytime you want to make a change to it. I don't think it's a good method. If people are absolutely in love with taxis, okay, we can replicate that and regulate another industry. But I would much prefer to deregulate what their requirements are. I'd like to give them a more level playing field. And I think that's the next step in this process, regardless of what we do with Uber, is we have to address the issues that these guys are burdened with. And I'd like to see a lot of those go away. Thank you.
Mr. Still.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank everybody for the input today. It brought the issue back. We've been kind of waiting for this process to bubble back up, but I will look at the information, and I'm hoping that we're able to get off dead center one way or another. Thank you.
And for the chair's comments, and I want to thank Mr. Evans for co-chairing on the Transportation Network Subcommittee, and thank Mr. Trainee and Ms. Gray Jackson for the leadership here to merge the two meetings for the day. I will say thank you to the Law Department, Ms. Ennis, Mr. Gates, for bringing in the presentation. And I hear you. You're looking for policy direction from this body in which to proceed or move forward with this TNC, or I'm sure any other that may decide they might want to try Anchorage out for size. Mr. Musser, I appreciate your insight. I know you didn't have a lot of time I know you had a presentation. I'm sure some of the information you shared today was probably on the presentation for PowerPoint. But thank you for that. Thank you, Chief Penning and Chief Fullenweider, for sticking around as well and your information. To my colleagues, I will say, and to the benefit of the members here, whether you're for or against, I'm for commerce. I have to say I am for commerce, and I'm certainly for fair and level play. And I think that's more than anything. If you know me well at all, you know that I'm for public safety. And I will say that where this issue is today, I believe is very appropriate. We have to look out for the members of our community, including visitors, people that travel from around the world, may not even understand much in the way of English language or our cultures. But one thing they do seem to recognize is something that's marked and identified as simple as a cab or the bus. And of course, the buses are becoming more increasingly difficult because they put these wraps on them, and they don't all look the same anymore. But the concerns I have is that members are safe in our community. The school district, I might remind my colleagues, the school district uses cabs to transport some kids in and out of district to different foster homes or different programs that they have. I mean, they have used cabs for that. And to that end, I believe that this industry, whether it's Uber, side lift car, whatever they call these other companies that are out there, and I have studied a bit, I am disturbed. I really am concerned about what I believe is an attempt to try to operate outside the lines of what is an industry standard that has been worked on in this community and updated as recent as a couple of years ago. And with great pain, I might say, with a lot of pushback, a lot of yelling and screaming, and frankly, with a lot of interest and work from a committee of our community citizens. So I'd ask that we continue to push forward and try to find where we can work within the guidelines. And I think I'm frankly I'm exploring the option of looking at what can we do to service better our outlying areas. I mean, we hear from Eagle River their lack of transportation options, Girdwood as well. But I do believe that our cab industry, our people that live here in this community that have worked really hard, by and large, do a very good job. And I will note for the record that I've noticed more and more non-former police vehicles in operation. Subaru wagons, I've seen Prius the other day. I mean, there's a lot of different vehicles out there on the road. So we all have a responsibility in this room, and particularly this body, to making sure that our community is safe. And I'd ask you to challenge you all to do the same, continue to transport our public in our community safely. So this will be the end of this meeting. We'll 2 o'clock on the dot. So I know we started a little late, but we'll conclude the meeting today. Yes, so Mr. Hall. Thank you, Mr. Hall. And I thought I heard the phone earlier, and I meant to ask. I wish you had said something, but we'll make the. Thank you, sir. Anything you else would like to share, Mr. Hall? Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.